The room that trained you may not survive. The question is who you become while everyone else is trying to survive what comes next. Welcome to Leadership, Law, and Lightwork. I'm Marcia Narayan Weldon. This is the show where we look at how the brain, the body, the law, power, and pressure shape the way we lead and decide. Today we're talking about The Devil Wears Prada 2. Spoiler alert. I am going to talk about some major themes and some plot points, though I'll try to avoid the final turn of the ending. If you haven't seen the movie yet, you can still follow along, and if you're never going to see it, it's okay. Now, you might have seen some reviews saying that the sequel has fewer laughs, fewer zingers, or less of that sharp comic snap that people remember from the original, and that might be fair. But for our purposes, the movie's useful because it shows a powerful institution under pressure. And whether you care about fashion or not, what happens at Runway could happen almost anywhere. So Runway, the magazine from the first movie, is facing the kind of disruption that many workplaces are facing right now. The old print magazine model has changed. Magazines that once ran hundreds of pages are a lot thinner. Readers have moved online. Advertisers have more leverage. Corporate owners are watching the numbers. And consultants are talking about restructuring. And of course, AI is hovering over everything, the creative work, everything. Staff members can feel something happening even before anyone gives them a straight answer about what it means for their jobs, their departments, their budgets, or their futures. Miranda Priestly is still Miranda Priestly, and she's modeled after Anna Wintour from Vogue. She still has taste, she still has standards, she still has that terrifying ability to make a room organize itself around her breathing pattern, but the room has changed. So if you listen to episode 39 of this podcast, you know I talked about bullying, and I talked about power and silence, and the audience that allows bad behavior to continue. And by the way, if that's something you're dealing with, witnessing, managing, or being accused of, I created separate guides, witness guides, leader guides, and guides for the person who's accused of bullying. Each guide is about 75 pages and is designed to help people understand the pattern, reduce harm, and choose their next step more carefully. You can find them at illuminatingwisdom.com/bullying. The link is also in the show notes. So this episode picks up a related thread from a different angle. Miranda has always been easy to read as the bully. In the original movie, she controlled the room through fear, silence, status, taste, and the constant threat of professional exile. People rearranged themselves around her. They learned how to anticipate what she wanted before she said it. A coat, a look, or one sentence could change the temperature of the entire office. In this version of the movie, part 2, she's still intimidating. She can still be cutting. She still knows how to make people feel small when she wants to. And then she finds herself pressed by forces that she simply can't dismiss. That history does not disappear, though. It just makes the leadership question more complicated. So what happens when the person who once controlled the room is forced to confront a room she can no longer control? What happens when market pressure, technology, ownership, and fear start doing to her what she's done to other people? And what happens when everyone else has to think about surviving while the leadership is fighting for survival? And that's why I want to use the characters in the movie as archetypes today. We're looking at the roles people play when an institution is under pressure. Every disrupted organization has the same version of these people, so it doesn't matter if you saw the movie. The icon under pressure, the returning insider, the former outsider with new power, the keeper of the institution, and the people reading the room because no one is telling them enough. So Miranda, she's the icon under pressure. She's powerful for a reason. She has judgment. She has taste. She has discipline. She sees what other people miss. She understands the standard, and she can tell when people are pretending to meet it. And that's why that character endures. And she's more than a mean boss in expensive and gorgeous clothes. She represents a kind of authority many professional cultures still admire, even when they resent it. The brilliant person with impossible standards who built something people still want to be near. The trouble begins when old power confuses fear with excellence. A leader can have real judgment and still create a room where people hide the truth. A leader can protect the standards and still damage the people trying to meet them. A leader can be right about the work and wrong about the way the work gets carried out. So in the sequel, Miranda's power is no longer protected by the same conditions. She can't rely on her mystique alone. The world around Runway and her has become much less patient with fear as a management system. And this is really the test for every icon under pressure. Can you adapt without making everyone else pay for your fear? Can you protect the part of your leadership that's actually valuable without clinging to the rituals that made people afraid of you? Can you hear truth from people who no longer really need to worship you? And that archetype is everywhere. It might be the senior partner in the law office whose book of business made them untouchable once. It might be the founder whose instincts built the company, but whose old playbook no longer fits the market. Maybe it's the professor, the executive, the board chair, the rainmaker, the creative director, the general counsel, whose authority was formed in one era and is now being tested in another. And then there's Andy. She's the returning insider. She's no longer the young assistant trying to prove she belongs. She's been out in the world. She's done some serious work. She's earned professional recognition and accolades. She's been hit by some of the same forces affecting everyone else. She now knows what it feels like to work and remain vulnerable for decisions made above her. Her return to Runway is complicated because going back is rarely neutral. Sometimes people return to a firm, a company, a profession, a family system, or even a powerful personal relationship because the place still has something that they need: money, access, a platform, a network, a chance to hire people, or maybe a chance to repair a story that they left unfinished. The danger is that the old room still knows how to call the old self forward. Eddie's archetype asks a question many people understand. Can you return to a powerful room without being a version of yourself that the room once required? And then there's Emily. She's the former outsider with new power. She was shaped by Runway. She learned the codes, the hierarchy, the taste, the cruelty, the scarcity, and the rules of access. She learned what got rewarded. She learned what got mocked. She learned how close one can be to power without being fully seen by it. And now she has power of her own. And this is where that archetype becomes dangerous. The person who was once underestimated can become generous with power, or they become obsessed with finally controlling the room that made them feel small. And this happens in workplaces all the time. A former associate becomes a partner and repeats the same hazing they once hated. A manager who was ignored for years finally gets a team and starts confusing control with respect. A founder who once begged for access becomes unavailable to the next person that tries to get in the door. A leader who promised to be different discovers that pressure makes the old model just feel more efficient. Emily's archetype asks a hard question. When you finally get power, are you trying to build something better, or are you trying to win the old game? And that question really matters because people who have been wounded by systems can still reproduce those same systems when the power becomes available to them. And then there's Nigel. He's the keeper of the institution. Every organization has a Nigel. Sometimes the person is obvious, but often that person is really hidden in plain sight. Nigel understands how the work actually gets done. He knows the history, the relationships, the unspoken standards, the impossible requests, the emotional weather of the place. He can take a vague command from a powerful person and turn it into something that a team can execute. He knows which details matter because he spent years protecting the standard, often while absorbing all that stress that did not originate with him. He represents the craft, the institutional memory, the quiet competence that allows someone else to appear brilliant. And organizations, they love to say they value people like Nigel. Many of them discover how much those people carried when the crisis comes, when the restructuring starts, or the person finally stops absorbing what everyone else has been handing them. So one of the most meaningful moments in the movie is when Miranda asks whether she's taken him for granted. But the answer has been sitting in the room for 20 years. Leaders shouldn't wait until a crisis occurs to ask that question. So if you lead a team, a business, a classroom, a committee, a firm, a family, there may be someone whose work makes your leadership look smoother than it is. And that person may need authority, credit, protection, compensation, a real succession plan, or just the relief of no longer being treated as the place where everyone else's stress can land safely. So Nigel's archetype asks a question that every leader should sit with. Who is holding the institution together while someone else gets the mythology and the credit? And then there's the staff. These are the people reading the room. These are the people who don't have the full story, but they still feel the shift. The consultants arrive, the language changes, the meetings get smaller, the leaders get quieter, the budgets slow down, the projects stall, and then they hear words like efficiency, transformation, and alignment, and that starts to carry a different weight. So when leadership doesn't create a reliable channel for information, what happens? People create their own. They compare notes. They read the calendar invites like it's evidence. They watch who gets called into which rooms. They decide whether to stay, to leave, to lay low, to take risks. They call the recruiters, or they stop trusting the official message altogether. And that's what the restructuring scenes in this movie capture so well. Employees don't need every detail to feel the threat. They feel the gap between what the leaders say and what everyone else can see. And when that gap gets too wide, the organization becomes a rumor machine. So the movie's using fashion, but the pressure is familiar far beyond that industry. when the old room stops holding people, leadership has to do more of the holding. That means preserving dignity while telling as much truth as the moment allows. It also means noticing which archetype you're playing before fear makes that decision for you. You might have been the icon under pressure trying to preserve old authority, or maybe you're the returning insider trying to use the room without being used by it. That former outsider with the new power attempted to win the old game. The keeper of the institution carrying more than people see. One of the people reading the room trying to figure out whether the silence is actually dangerous. And most of us has been more than one of these at different points in our careers. And that's why this movie works, whether you like fashion or not. It asks whether anyone can stay human when the room starts changing faster than the people inside of it can process. And that brings us to the brief. Because the leadership lab, that issue was bigger than Runway. It's the question many leaders are facing right now. How do you lead when people are worried that the next meeting, the next AI rollout, the next consultant deck, or the next budget conversation might be beginning of the end for their job? So for today's brief, I want to use Dina Denham Smith's Harvard Business Review article, How to Lead When Employees Are Worried About Job Security. I'll link it in the show notes for you. Smith published this article in December 2025, and it already feels more urgent. AI implementation has accelerated. Layoffs have continued. More leaders are using the language of transformation, optimization, and efficiency, while employees are wondering what do those words actually mean for their own jobs. Our article cites Pew Research showing that U.S. workers are more worried than hopeful about AI in the workplace, and the American Psychological Association's 2025 Work in America survey reporting that job insecurity is significantly increasing stress levels for more than 54% of U.S. workers, and I bet that's higher now. Now, job insecurity rarely stays in the abstract. She writes that fear can push employees to go quiet, avoid risk, narrow their thinking, and default to self-proclaimed problem solving. They have unspoken fears. They can end up with distorted information and reduced engagement, collaboration, and performance. And this is exactly what leaders need to understand. Fear doesn't wait outside the conference room until the strategy meeting is over. It walks into the room with people. It affects what they say, what they withhold, how much risk they take, and whether they believe the official message that you give them at all. It changes the way they read the leader's face, tone, timing, and silence. Now, before I go any deeper, this is a good moment to thank today's sponsor, the iCaba AI Accelerator Group. It's a collective of Black AI professionals and practitioners with expertise in technology, business strategy, and real-world implementation. They're currently running their AI Accelerator series designed to help you move beyond AI theory and into practical tools you can use right now. Full disclosure, I'm presenting on the legal risks you need to know to protect your brand and your business. So check the show notes to register and grab your spot. And by the way, that sponsor note fits perfectly in today's conversation because the legal and leadership questions around AI are showing up in staffing decisions, business models, client expectations, and the way people are thinking about their own futures. And I know this beyond that HBR article because I grew up as the child of two parents who worked for airlines. So layoff fear was part of the background noise of my entire childhood. It was adult conversation at the edges of the room. It was the tension I could feel before I even had the vocabulary for it. I remember what happened when Eastern Airlines, where my parents worked, shut down. In South Florida, that was a business story, but it was also a family story. It affected neighborhoods, mortgages, retirements, identities, and the futures that people thought were secure. And later, I saw layoffs from inside the organization. I worked in HR. I worked in a legal department. I was in the rooms when the layoffs were being planned, reviewed, messaged, and executed. I've also counseled so many people who have been through layoffs, and the emotional and financial tax is real. Because people have to worry about their health insurance, their rent, their mortgages, their tuition, their parents, children, their immigration status, their medical care, savings, shame, identity, and whether they'll ever feel safe that they're going to work again. They replay how they were told. They remember whether anyone looked them in the eye, whether they got the message by text, whether the message sounded human. They remember whether there was a place to ask questions. They remember whether the company treated the exit as a spreadsheet event or as a human event. This is also why I've been paying some close attention to the Spirit Airlines situation. Public reporting from news sources and employees on social media have described employees receiving devastating employment news abruptly with urgent questions about notice, severance, and what happens next. This episode's not about Spirit, but it's about the broader leadership lesson that's hard to miss. Some situations like Spirit's are extraordinary. A company facing a possible shutdown may be negotiating with lenders, regulators, investors, bankruptcy counsel, unions, government officials, or maybe even potential buyers until the 11th hour. Leaders may genuinely have legal, financial, and operational limits on what they can say. But let's be real, most layoffs don't happen that way. In many organizations, leaders know cuts are likely well before the employees hear anything. They may not know every name or final date, but they're planning, and they're in the planning process for a while. And that can't stop at selection criteria, severance numbers, talking points, and systems access. It has to include the human experience of uncertainty. So Smith's article is useful because she doesn't ask leaders to pretend they have certainty. She asks them to provide orientation. She talks about acknowledging fear, shrinking uncertainty, co-creating next steps, spreading calm, and amplifying connection. It sounds simple until you've lived inside a real restructuring. Because leaders might have some legal restraints. They might be board conversations, lender issues, WARN Act analysis, acquisition negotiations, and information security risks. And the timing is delicate, right? You communicate too early, and you may create weeks or months of fear, attrition, customer concern, operational disruption, and the real risk around confidential information, like trade secrets, client lists, pricing data, code, strategy documents, or other sensitive material. Wait too long, and people have no time to plan. They might find out through rumor, social media, systems lockout, some weird, strange calendar invite to a conference room they've never gone to before, or an email that feels cold and final. The job loss then becomes something that's more than an economic event. It becomes a memory of being treated as disposable. And that is the leadership tension in disruption. The real work is disciplined, humane communication. Leaders can say what's known, what's still undecided, what can't be shared, and when people will hear more. They can prepare managers before employees start asking questions that managers can't answer. They can create a place for questions. They can avoid false reassurance. They can use language that sounds like it came from an actual human being. When outcomes aren't ready, they can still give people process. So Smith uses the idea of shrinking uncertainty. And I really like that phrase because it respects reality. A leader can't always remove uncertainty, but a leader can shrink the unnecessary part of it. In practice, it might sound like this. I know there's concern about the restructuring. I can't answer every question today, and I'm not going to guess. What I can tell you is that no final decisions have been communicated to this team. We expect to know more by the end of the month. I'll give you an update every Friday, even if the update is that nothing has changed. In the meantime, please bring your questions to me, and I'll answer what I can. That doesn't make the news painless, but it does change the emotional environment. People can handle difficult truth better than they can handle being left alone with rumors. They can handle "we don't know yet" better than silence that's dressed up as strategy. They can handle limits better than evasion, especially when the leader names the limits honestly. Smith also writes about spreading calm, which matters because a leader's emotional state has an outsized impact on a team's nervous system. Because calm is a nervous system state a leader can create and protect, and that tone, pacing, and written communication, they all shape how people experience uncertainty. And this is where a lot of leaders make things worse accidentally. A cold email can sound more ominous than the sender intended. A vague meeting invite can ruin somebody's entire weekend. A rushed hallway comment can become a team-wide theory by lunch. A manager who says, "I wouldn't worry," when everyone has reason to worry, is going to lose credibility in that one sentence. So calm is not pretending. It's being regulated enough to tell the truth that you can tell without leaking panic, resentment, or avoidance into the room. And connection matters too. Smith writes that stress responses decrease when people feel accompanied rather than isolated, and she recommends consistent, genuine connection through check-ins, team rituals, and belonging cues. And this is critical during layoffs and restructuring because fear isolates people. Employees protect themselves. They stop asking for help. They stop trusting colleagues. They start calculating whether today's conversation can be used against them tomorrow. And leaders, you can't fix all that with an all-hands meeting. But leaders can influence it through rhythm, presence, and behavior. Regular updates matter. Manager preparation matters. Honest language matters. A place for questions matters. Clear support resources matters. Follow-up after the announcement matters. The way people leave matters because the people who stay are watching. And so this brings us back to the Devil Wears Prada too. So Runway staff can feel the threat before they can prove it. They see the consultants. They hear the language. They know leadership is holding information. They know the old institution is changing around them. The fear is not irrational. The cuts, the pressure, and the uncertainty, they're all real. The leadership failure is in allowing silence to become the container. When silence becomes the container, people fill it with fear. Sometimes that fear becomes rumor. Sometimes it becomes panic. Sometimes it becomes secret information gathering. And sometimes it becomes resignation. And sometimes, and I've seen this a lot, it becomes a call to a lawyer. And that's why communication during disruption is not some soft issue. It's leadership, it's culture, and it is risk management. More important, it is dignity. And this is why leadership matters even more in disruption. The brand may not be enough. Neither will the title, the office, or the old business model. In disruption, leadership has to do more of the holding through honest communication, steadiness, process, and dignity. Before you move to the legal blind spot, this is exactly the kind of issue we'll keep unpacking through Legally Lucid. If you want a checklist and more information about what to do if you're affected by a layoff, or you want a weekly plain English legal issue spotting through the Legal Blind Spot newsletter, go to legallylucid.com and sign up for the newsletter. You can also click the link in the show notes. So when uncertainty becomes an exit, the leadership story often becomes a legal document. That document might be called a severance agreement, separation agreement, release of claims, settlement agreement. It may answer questions that leadership didn't answer earlier. What money you receive, what benefits continue, what claims you release, what restrictions survive, what you can say, what you have to return, whether you have to cooperate later, and what happens if there's a breach. And that's where today's legal blind spot comes in. So before you sign anything, you need to understand what you're really being asked to trade. The basic question is often the same regardless of what the document's called. What's the company offering, and what are you being asked to give up in exchange? I've seen these agreements from both sides of the table. In my Fortune 500 life, I was on the company side, negotiating and reviewing them. I also advise people who are trying to understand what they're being asked to sign when they're leaving a company. This is not the moment to skim. This is the moment to get a lawyer. But I want to give you some big picture things to think about. A severance agreement is usually an exchange. The company gives you something, and in return, you agree to release them from all kinds of liability. And this is why many severance agreements say the severance pay or the benefits are more than you would otherwise entitled to receive. People always get confused about that sentence, but it matters because it's about a legal principle called consideration. There needs to be some kind of exchange. The company is trying to show that it's giving you something extra in exchange for your release of the claims to sue them. If the company already owed you final wages, earned commissions, vested benefits, maybe accrued time off, expense reimbursements, or money required by a contract, that may already be yours. This is different from new value offered in exchange for a release. So when you see language saying that the severance is an addition to anything you're otherwise entitled to, pause long enough to ask whether that's actually true. Were you already owed final wages? Were commissions already earned? Was there a bonus plan? Was there an employment agreement? Was there a severance plan or policy? Were there vested benefits, equity, restricted stock units, options, deferred compensation? This is where the legal and practical analysis comes in. A severance number can look generous until you realize part of the package may include money the company already owed you. And the reverse may also be true. The company may be offering real additional value, new money, payment for COBRA benefits, a neutral reference, outplacement services, maybe accelerated vesting, or some other benefit. So you need to know which category you're in before you sign. Then look at the release. The release is often the heart of the agreement. It might say you're waiving claims against the company and a much broader group of released parties. That might include the parent company, subsidiaries, officers, directors, agents, successors, assigns, benefit plans, all of those things. You may think you're releasing one employer, but the document may be written to protect a much larger universe. Many agreements list federal, state, and local employment claims, contract claims, wage claims, discrimination claims, harassment claims, retaliation, leave, emotional distress, defamation, attorney's fees. Some releases include known and unknown claims. Some claims can be released, but some can't. Some require special wording. Some depends heavily on state law. Then look at what the agreement says you've already received. Some agreements are going to ask you to acknowledge that you've received everything you're owed. So if that statement's not accurate, don't glide past it. Then look at confidentiality and non-disparagement. People often read those quickly because they sound standard. Standard language can still matter. What can you say about the agreement? What can you say about your employment? Can you speak with your spouse, your lawyer, your tax advisor, your financial advisor, your therapist, or your immediate family? Does the agreement restrict truthful statements? Is the non-disparagement clause mutual? Who on the company side is bound? Are protected rights carved out? This last point is important. A well-drafted agreement should preserve certain rights that can't be legally signed away. Depending on the situation, that may include the right to file a charge, communicate with or participate in proceedings with agencies such as the EEOC, the SEC, the NLRB, OSHA, or a whole host of alphabet soup of other government agencies. It may also include whistleblower protections or other rights that can't be waived by private agreement. Then look at post-employment obligations. Pay close attention to things like the non-compete, non-solicitation, confidentiality, invention assignments, and trade secret language. State law varies, and enforceability can depend heavily on the facts, the role, the state, and the wording. This is one of the areas where it's especially important to speak to a lawyer in your jurisdiction before signing, because a restriction that follows you after the job ends may affect your ability to work, serve clients, build your own business, or accept your next opportunity. Is the agreement creating new restrictions, or is it reaffirming old ones? Is it pointing back to an offer letter, an equity agreement, a confidentiality agreement, an assignment agreement for maybe inventions, maybe another non-solicit, non-compete, or bonus plan? What's in your actual employee handbook? Sometimes people are so focused on their severance number that they don't remember the restrictions that may follow them. And then look at benefits timing. What happens after the agreement is signed? When does health coverage end? Will COBRA be available? Is the company paying or subsidizing COBRA for a period of time? When does severance get paid? Is it a lump sum or installments? Does payment only begin after the revocation period expires? Can payment stop if the company claims you breached the agreement? Do you have a right to cure or make things right? If you have equity agreements or retirement benefits, don't assume that the severance agreement is going to answer every question. You may need to look at plan documents, award agreements, commission plans, and prior restrictive covenant agreements. 40 or over, slow down again. Agreements that release federal age discrimination claims have special rules under the Older Workers Benefit Protection Act. Depending on the size of your organization and whether the separation is part of a group layoff or an individual, there may be review periods, revocation periods, and required disclosures. Also ask what happens if there's a breach. Does the company stop paying? Can it claw back payments? Are there liquidated damages? Is there an attorney's fees provision? Where would a dispute be heard? What law applies? These provisions may feel far away when you're trying to get through the exit. They matter if something goes wrong later. So the practical review is this. Before signing any severance agreement, do not run this through AI. This is too important to just have AI tell you your rights. Understand what you're receiving, what you're releasing, who you're releasing, and what restrictions follow you. Now, by the way, this segment is general legal education and should not be taken as legal advice. It is not creating an attorney-client relationship. I'm a lawyer. I'm not your lawyer. If you're dealing with a specific situation, talk to a lawyer in your jurisdiction who can advise you based on the facts and who has employment law expertise. I'll go deeper into some of this on Friday's Legal Blind Spot newsletter, including a plain English checklist of what to look for before you sign. The link will be in the show notes. Now, this takes us to today's toolkit take. Today's toolkit is called Name, Orient, and Choose. This tool is my synthesis of 3 evidence-informed regulation practices. And I want you to think about this as a practical tool. It's not a substitute for medical care, therapy, or legal advice. Use it when uncertainty starts running the meeting inside your body. Your body often registers uncertainty before your conscious mind can organize it. Your chest might tighten, your jaw may lock up, your stomach might drop. Your breathing may get shallow, maybe your attention narrows, because your brain is starting to search for danger and filling in the missing information. So this is not weakness, this is not a problem. This is what your nervous system is designed to do. It's designed to protect you. And from a neuroscience perspective, uncertainty can activate the brain's threat systems because the brain is built to predict. So when information is missing, the brain's going to start to try to fill in the gaps. So under stress, those predictions often tilt toward danger. They can reduce access to the prefrontal cortex, that part of your brain that helps with judgment, planning, and perspective taking. So the goal is not to force yourself to calm down. I wouldn't ask you that. The goal is to give your brain and body enough safety signals to restore access to judgment. This is where name, orient, and choose comes in. First, I want you to name what's happening. You don't need the whole story. You just need one true sentence. You might say, I'm scared, or I don't have enough information, or I'm filling in the blanks, or I'm angry, or I'm trying to control something I can't control. Dina Denham-Smith article from the Harvard Business Review talks about affect labeling, which means putting feelings into words. Naming the feeling can reduce the intensity of the negative emotion and help move the brain closer to problem solving. When your fear stays unnamed, the body treats it like atmosphere. And once you name it, there's a little more distance between you and the feeling. Maybe you've heard name it to tame it. Second, orient. Look around the room slowly. Let your eyes land on 3 ordinary objects. Maybe it's a lamp, a book, a glass, a window, your coffee mug, something to let your body know that you're here. Put your feet on the floor or rest your body against the chair longer than you think you need to, and then breathe in and out for 3 times. Longer exhale than inhale. Orienting the body tells the body, I'm here. I'm not imagining every future at once. A longer exhale can support parasympathetic activation through what's called the vagus nerve. That helps the fight or flight thing that you may have heard about in the past. It helps the brain update the threat map. You're not living in imagined danger. Your sensory system receives accurate information. And this matters because uncertainty pulls you outside of prediction. Orienting brings you back to perception. You're not making yourself passive. You're giving yourself judgment, and your judgment gets a chance to return. Then third, choose one right action. You're not trying to solve the whole thing. Just think the next thing that's going to protect your judgment or your options. Maybe that means pausing before you send that email, asking one grounded question, waiting before signing, maybe taking a walk before deciding what does this mean to your future. The point is to create space between the trigger and the reaction, because this is where your judgment can come back. So this week, try name, orient, and choose. Name what's happening. Orient to the room that you're actually in and the space you're in. Choose one next action that protects your judgment. Use it before you communicate an uncertainty. Use it before you spiral. And use it before you sign anything. The room may be changing. Maybe that information's incomplete and the next decision may really matter. So give your nervous system enough safety to let your judgment back into the room. If this episode helped you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. If something landed, leave a comment in whatever platform you're watching or listening, or email me at marcia@illuminatingwisdom.com. I read every email and every comment, and I really want to hear from you. Now take what you learned today and let it shape how you lead, how you choose, and how you move through the world. I'll see you next time.